We all rely on farmers and ranchers, but farming is riskier than other businesses out there. Crop insurance helps farmers manage their risk. With crop insurance, farmers put skin in the game by paying premiums and shouldering deductibles. That keeps taxpayers from having to pick up the whole bill every time disaster strikes. Today, about 90% of U.S. farmland is insured, providing $100 billion in protection to more than 130 different kinds of crops. It's a testament to the program's success.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse Senior Editor Phil Brasher, discussing the week that was, agriculturally speaking, in Washington, D.C. And the big news in Washington this week for agriculture and really for every other sector of the economy is that the Republicans, the White House and Congress, all rolled out a framework for their tax policy, their tax reform plan that they're looking to do here in the coming months and years. And so probably the main headline issue that came out of that tax reform, especially for people in agricultural corners of the economy, was that they want to repeal the estate tax.
Yeah, it's down there. There's not a lot of detail in this plan. We very much would call it an outline or framework, as it would describe, because there's a lot of detail still to be filled in. But one detail that was there without question, and highlighted actually by the president when he went to Indianapolis on Wednesday, was that, as you said, they wanted to eliminate once and for all the estate tax.
Mm-hmm. And Phil, you said it in your response there, there's a lot up in the air right now. There's a lot of things that we do know, but there's probably more that we don't know about what a potential final product will really look like. So as we're watching this process unfold, for those that are concerned about the impacts of tax reform on agriculture, what do you think they should be watching for?
Well, I want to emphasize one thing sort of up front. For agriculture, when it comes to tax reform, it's almost a defensive posture that agriculture has to get in, because there are already a number of very important provisions in the law that farms and ranches rely on. That includes being able to write off interest expenses. That means being able to use the cash accounting as opposed to accrual accounting. Being able to write off capital expenses. Number of issues like that, and so the biggest issue for a lot of farmers is just making sure that those provisions stay in law. Mm-hmm. One of the things that the plan does is it seeks to limit the use of interest expensing for corporations. Now the expectation is that they will leave that in place for small businesses, for agriculture, but that's not in writing yet. Just assurances.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of things still really up in the air. This is really kind of a kickoff week for tax reform in Washington, and we see a framework, and we'll have to let you know what they draw inside that picture frame.
Yeah, a couple of things I should mention. Kip Tom, who's a well-known large-scale farmer in Indiana, was actually invited to meet with the president and be there when he made his announcement of the tax plan in Indianapolis on Wednesday. And the president referred to them when he talked about the estate tax. Kip met privately with 3 other people and the president before the speech, and brought up a couple of these issues: cash accounting, interest expensing with the president, and the president assured him that he supported continuing those two. So we'll add that. I don't think there's any chance that Congress would take away either of those, because I think that the politics, it would be possible to get it through, especially the Senate, but in the House as well. It would create all sorts of problems with for agriculture to attack either of those, even though they could potentially raise a lot of money to offset some of the other things that that Congress wants to do, the Republicans want to do.
So theme of the tax reform discussion at this point is to stay tuned.
Right.
Still a lot of things yet to be decided, but we did see a framework this week, so we'll keep moving from there.
It's also important to say this is number one on the Republican agenda. There's not a number 2, 3, or 4, or 5 at this point. This is number one. They don't have much to show for the first 8 months of 10 months of this year of controlling both the White House and Congress. They're rolling it all in on tax reform.
Mm-hmm. So it'll be interesting to follow that. But I want to move to some other news that happened really this week and last week. We didn't do one of these videos last week mainly because one of us was not in North America. I'm not pointing any fingers. But there were some important developments that happened last week, and that being the Senate Agriculture Committee holding a confirmation hearing for two very high-level USDA appointees. As of right now, it's important to keep reminding you, the only Senate-confirmed official at the Department of Agriculture is Secretary Sonny Perdue, and he has said frequently and publicly that he's wanting to get some help over there. The Senate trying to move on that process. They've cleared Steve Censky and Ted McKinney out of the Senate Agriculture Committee for...
Nope, so I'll stop you there. They have not cleared them out.
Then.
We think they will. Senator Roberts wants to, or Chairman Pat Roberts wants to do that next week to get them out of committee. They did have the hearing last week, as you noted. But since you were out of the country, you were not here, Spencer. So we'll give him that excuse.
Yeah.
But we should have a committee vote on Censky and McKinney. That's the Deputy Secretary, the number 2 in the department, Steve Censky, and Ted McKinney, who would be the first Undersecretary for Trade and Foreign Agricultural Services. Should have a committee vote, and I think floor action very quickly after that. So it'll be October, but it looks like Secretary Perdue may finally have some help up there.
Yeah. Help will be on the way, and then at that point we wait for further hearings for further nominees like Bill Northey and Greg Ibach.
Yeah, and Northey and Ibach are next. Bill Northey, Secretary of Agriculture in Iowa, nominated to be the Undersecretary for Farm and Conservation Programs. Greg Ibach, another critical nominee for the position of Undersecretary for Marketing and Regulatory Programs. He is now runs the Nebraska Agriculture Department. We could have hearing on them as well next week and start to get the ball rolling on those nominations as well.
So some more developments to follow as they continue to work to staff up the Department of Agriculture. And want to wrap up this week with some news that came kind of on Tuesday and Wednesday. On Tuesday, Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue hosted a briefing at the Forest Service building for a number of senators where they discussed the issues surrounding wildfires, specifically fire borrowing and proper management of those wildfires. Also saw some movement on Wednesday then with 2 hearings, one in the House, one in the Senate on the subject. And the hearings were not quite as focused on fire borrowing, but more so on the management techniques that should be employed to help prevent some of these wildfires in the western part of the United States. Because as I'm sure many of you know, and maybe many of you are experiencing, there's quite a bit of fire activity in the western United States right now, and they're trying to curb that and look for the proper mechanism, be it increased funding, increased management, or some combination of the two, to try and prevent a fire season like we've seen in 2017 from happening in the years to come.
It's created big funding constraints for USDA.
Right. I believe the number they're at right now is $2.4 billion they're going to spend in the 2017 fiscal year on suppression activity, which is going to be pretty substantial for that department.
Yeah, a lot of bipartisan support, and this actually started with Tom Vilsack, Sonny Perdue's predecessor. Pushed this, couldn't get a solution, and interesting that Perdue has very much picked it up, and as you noted, had senators from both parties over to the Forest Service this week.
A number of pieces of legislation out there to try and address the issue. At this point, it's a waiting game to see which legislative vehicle is pursued. Important to note that John Brasher, who chairs the Environment and Public Works Committee on the Senate side of life here in Washington, said that they want to get something done this year. And so we'll let you know when this year kind of comes to fruition on that goal. But there are goals and sights in sight for addressing wildfire funding as well as prevention here in the coming months. But I think that's going to do it for this week's video. I certainly appreciate you stopping by Agri-Pulse.com. But for Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.